I moved into Birchwood Apartments wearing the kind of optimism that comes from packing a single suitcase and telling yourself you're starting over. After a breakup that left me skittish and hollow around people, I wanted small comforts, wooden floors that creaked the way old houses do, wide windows that let in rain smell and gray light, and the anonymity of a building full of other people's routines. I thought a corner unit on the 3rd floor would be a good place to stitch myself back together. What I didn't know then was how easily a neighbor could unpick those stitches. The building had character in the way that older buildings do: stubborn pipes, plaster walls with stories in their cracks, and a stairwell that always smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. On my first night, a man across the hall knocked, smiled, and held out a tin of lemon cookies like an offering. He was older than me, maybe early 60s, with a cardigan that looked like it had been knitted by someone who loved it very much. "I'm Oliver Brent," he said, voice practiced to a warm timbre. "Unit 4B. Welcome to Birchwood." I accepted the tin because manners felt like ballast then. I should have kept it sealed. For a few days, I told myself I was being paranoid. The scratches in my doorframe? Maybe the old wood flexed. The packages on my doorstep? Maybe I'd absent-mindedly ordered kitchen stuff in a late-night fog of moving. Oliver's memory about my schedule he knew when I usually came home felt unsettling, but I told myself it was coincidence. I was trying to rebuild a life, not catalog anxiety. Then the photograph slid under my door. A glossy print, edges cold against my palm, showing my living room from the outside at 2 in the morning. There I was, on the couch, mid-sleep, blanket half over my knees. On the back, in neat block letters, "You shouldn't sleep with the curtains open. People worry." I called the building manager and tried to keep my voice steady. He sighed, said only maintenance had keys and he hadn't stepped in my unit in months. He mentioned Oliver once, shrugged, keeps to himself. That meant nothing, and everything. The rational part of me wanted evidence, explanation. The older part of me tightened up like a fist. By the time I found the brass key taped to my door and realized it matched the dull shape of the building's master key, I was no longer bargaining with paranoia. I was cornered by a reality that felt like it belonged in the margins of other people's news feeds. My past experience of being watched during a project in college, something I'd buried under deadlines and therapy, cracked open again. I started sleeping in tiny shifts, lights on, chair barricade under the bedroom doorknob. I was a fortress of brittle rituals. The thing about fear is how it rearranges your life without permission. I quit staying at my favorite coffee shop late because the barista's smile felt like a spotlight. I missed a client meeting because my hands trembled and I couldn't sit through a screen full of faces. I started looking out windows and counting the number of unlit hallways between me and the street. My whole existence narrowed into the space between my front door and my bedroom door, a thin corridor of precautions. When the fire alarm blared at 2 in the morning and everyone hit the hallway in bathrobes and slippers, I expected chaos. I expected smoke. Instead, there was Oliver calm, slippers whispering on the floorboards, tea in hand already standing in the stairwell like he'd been waiting for an act cue. "I thought this would get you out," he said as he passed me, casual as rain. The fire department later told us someone had pulled the alarm, and the camera facing that hallway had been unplugged. A nail had been driven into the building's sense of safety. I keep telling myself the worst part wasn't that he entered my apartment, it was how domesticated the intrusion felt. A mug in my sink I didn't wash. My couch nudged a few inches as if it had caught the weight of someone else's breath. My bedroom window closed when I always left it open to the rain. Nothing shattered, nothing ripped. It was as though someone had practiced living inside my life until it fit. When I finally installed a cheap camera on my bookshelf and staged my own absence, the footage felt like a bad dream made documentary. At 9:47 p.m., my door clicked. Oliver stepped in on gloved hands, moving through my apartment with the careful economy of someone who'd rehearsed his steps. He sniffed, like you do when you come into a kitchen after someone else has made coffee. He opened drawers as if reminiscing through someone else's moments. He moved with intimacy, a trespasser claiming the rhythm of my life as his own. Watching him on that tiny screen, I realized how small our lives really were, how much could be taken without a sound. I left that night with the camera's footage saved and my lungs full of cold air. The police found duplicate keys, webcams, recordings, journals marked with my routines, and a drawer of things he'd taken from my apartment. So small, so personal. A toothbrush, an old band tee, a scarf. Stalking, unlawful surveillance. breaking and entering. The legal words sounded like antiseptic dressings over a bruise. Arrest didn't make the fear smaller, it just made it official. Moving out in 3 days was wrenching. I left with boxes and a trembling sense of disbelief. The new apartment has bare walls and locks that clank with satisfaction when I turn them. I don't accept cookies anymore. I don't smile at doors. I go to therapy appointments and nod through cognitive exercises about reclaiming space. Sometimes that works. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes I wake up sweating because I dreamt the hallway light was on and he was at the end of it, smiling with a tin. The moral of this part of my life is simple and ugly. Danger sometimes lives next door, and trust is not a currency you can spend freely. You can be kind, open, and neighborly, and still need to keep some locks double-bolted. We want to believe that people with warm hands and lemon cookies have good intentions. We want to believe our buildings are sanctuaries, but sometimes sanctuary is a myth until you make it one again carefully, deliberately, lock by lock. I tell this not as a confession but as a map. If anything in my story helps you notice a borrowed key, a camera light that flickers a fraction too long, or a package that leaves your name attached to fear, notice it. Be kind, but keep your door shut until you know the person on the other side. You learn, in the end, that safety is a practice, not a state. Be rigorous about it. Be stubborn. And when someone brings you a tin of cookies, hold the tin, not the person. I moved into Avalon Crest, 6 months after Sophie and I called it quits. I needed a quiet place to rebuild, and the one bedroom above a laundromat was cheap, close to work, and had windows that looked out over a small courtyard. For a sound designer, silence isn't absence, it's raw material. I thought the place would be perfect. The walls were thin in ways that mattered. At first it was little things, faint tapping, a chair scraped once in the night, the occasional low murmur through the vents. I learned the building's rhythms, what was old pipe settling and what was someone walking through their life. Unit 4A belonged to Mrs. Calhoun, an elderly woman everyone nodded to but rarely spoke with. She kept to herself, which suited me fine. One night, while I was layering whispered tracks for a freelance horror project, I heard my name through the vent. It was hushed and intimate, the kind of whisper you'd record in a studio and then bury under effects. I took my headphones off, checked my files, convinced myself it was fatigue. Sound people worry about phantom audio the way other people worry about phantom pain. We make ghosts out of stray frequencies. A few weeks later I found a small package by her door that had been misdelivered to me. I knocked and called softly. The door was ajar. Inside I heard what sounded like something heavy being dragged. I left the box on her stoop and went back to my apartment, thinking she didn't want to be disturbed. At 1:03 a.m., a clear woman's voice said my name, from the dark corner between my kitchen and hallway. Not from the vent, not muffled right out in my living room. Lucas. I turned on the light. Nothing. The string lights by the window swayed as if brushed by a hand. I froze. I called out to 4A, and from inside came a thud like something heavy hitting the floor, which matched the sound I'd heard earlier when I was at her door. I called the property manager, Keen. He answered like someone who'd been woken up often for broken faucets. When I told him what happened, there was a long pause. Lucas, apartment 4A has been empty for 3 weeks, he said. My stomach dropped. She moved in with her daughter after her fall. I told him about knocking. He said the unit had been locked the entire time and he had the only key. Something cold pressed at the back of my neck, and the voice soft, near enough that I felt the breath whispered my name again. I spun around. Nothing but the living room's dim corners. A dragging noise came from inside the wall behind the couch. Keen promised to send maintenance in the morning. I didn't sleep. I turned every light on, backed against the door, and waited until dawn with my equipment case between my knees like a shield. When I finally opened the door the next morning, the package I'd left on 4A's stoop was at my feet, opened. Inside was a small metal wind chime, tarnished and old, the exact tone I'd been hearing when I thought someone was moving in my living room. Tucked under it was a scrap of paper. It helps you hear what's already there. That afternoon, Keen texted a photo. 4A's floor, dusty but with fresh drag marks leading from the far corner straight toward the shared wall with my apartment. The scratches were deliberate, not random scuffs, and they made the skin on my arms go cold. Maintenance said the place had been empty, yet something had moved through that room. I went down to look. The door to 4A was locked, but a little push on the frame let me press my ear to the wood. The dragging started slow, A heavy shush across floorboards, then stopped when I knocked. I left a note under the door asking if anyone needed help. No reply. When Keen finally opened 4A with the master key, the apartment looked like it had been prepared for new tenants. Clean, bare, the air stale from being closed up. But the drag marks were real, and they ended at the wall that met my living room. Near the baseboard, someone had shoved a photograph through the crack and then pulled it back. The black and white picture showed an older woman sitting on a couch with a wind chime on the table beside her. The back had one line in shaky handwriting: "Don't let her in." That night, Keen agreed to stay in my apartment until I could find another place. But maintenance insisted nothing could be found structurally wrong, no hidden crawl spaces, no hollow cavities big enough to hide a person. Keen's patience, however, had a limit. He'd been covering complaints about this building for years: noises, tenants leaving mid-lease, little things that made people uneasy, and he'd stopped asking questions. "People don't want to know," he muttered once, handing me another cup of stale coffee. At 2 a.m., while we were both awake and far too alert, the vent above the couch rattled. The same voice, closer than any human should be, whispered, "Let me in." The wind chime's tone chimed softly in the air, though nothing touched it. I moved toward the vent, ridiculous and frightened, and for a split second I saw a pale face pressed against the duct, lips moving around my name. The face drew back and the vents went still. After that, all my instincts screamed at me to leave, but leaving felt like admitting defeat to something I couldn't define. I packed what I could in the gear case: hard drives, mic, laptop, a few shirts, and Keen drove me to a friend's place across town. We filed a request to break my lease the next day. Keen didn't argue. He didn't need to. I could see the relief on his face when I signed the papers and left the keys off in the office drop. Now, months later, in a different apartment, with thick insulation and vents that sound like pipes, I still check each grate before I fall asleep. I left my whisper tracks behind, swapped them for ambient pads that don't mimic human breath. I don't need to be clever enough to record a noise to hear it. Some sounds find you. Sometimes when it's quiet enough to hear the radiator settle. I think about the photograph shoved through that bare wall, Mrs. Calhoun's face, the wind chime on the table, the warning written like a breath: "Don't let her in." I wonder who wrote it, and what they meant by it. I wonder if there was someone in that apartment before I moved in, someone who couldn't get out. I wonder if she ever waited too long to answer the knocks on her door. I learned to trust the small things, the way your skin tightens before a bad dream, the hairs that rise when someone whispers your name and no one is there. You can't always explain why a noise feels wrong, but when it does, it usually means you should act. I left before I understood everything, and maybe that unsettles me, most the not knowing, but it's a small piece to carry. Better to go when a voice tells you to listen than to stay waiting for an explanation that might never come. Moral: pay attention to the subtle warnings you feel. Ignore them at your peril. Trust your instincts, and when something in your home doesn't feel right, act. It's easier to leave than to learn too late why you should have. I moved to Willow Street in February 2017 because I was tired of pretending my old life wasn't destroying me. My daughter, Maisie, was 4 and starting to notice things she shouldn't, like her father sleeping on the bathroom floor or yelling at ghosts only he could see. Caleb was brilliant once, but bipolar disorder and addiction don't care about potential. They erase the people you love until they're strangers in your own home. When Maisie looked at him and asked, "Why does Daddy sleep like that?" I started packing that same afternoon. Willow Street felt like the opposite of everything I left behind. Quiet, orderly, pastel houses, lined up like they belonged in a magazine. My small rental home wasn't perfect, but it had a fenced yard and a room for Maisie. That was enough. The only thing that unsettled me was House No. 22 next door. The man who lived there, Graham Alder, kept his curtains almost shut, leaving thin slits that looked more like watch posts than windows. His backyard gate had 3 metal latches. He walked like every step required thought. I met him the day I moved in. I was carrying bags inside when he appeared on the sidewalk. "You must be the new neighbor," he said. "Lena, right?" I didn't remember telling him my name, but I convinced myself the landlord probably mentioned it. He helped carry one bag, set it by the door, and studied me with a polite smile that didn't soften his eyes. That first week, I noticed something strange. Every night at exactly 2:14 a.m., his lights flickered 3 times. Always the same pattern. Then came a faint dragging noise. Slow, heavy. I told myself old houses make weird sounds, but the consistency made me uneasy. I was trying to rebuild a life, steady job, stable home, quiet nights, but I'd learned long ago that quiet doesn't always mean safe. Sometimes quiet is what danger sounds like right before it introduces itself, and that introduction arrived in the form of a package I never asked for. One evening, a delivery driver knocked while I was getting Maisie ready for bed. He held a long parcel wrapped in dark brown paper. "Package for a Graham Alder," he said. "He said you'd keep it for him." I frowned. "I didn't agree to that," he insisted. The driver shrugged, already heading back to his van. The box was heavier than I expected, and cold, unnaturally cold. Maisie reached toward it, but I pulled her back gently. I set the package on the counter and tried to convince myself it was harmless. That night, the lights in Graham's house flickered earlier than usual, 1:58 a.m. Then came the dragging noise. But what followed made my heart drop, a whisper outside my bedroom window. "Thank you for taking it." The voice was quiet, but unmistakably male. I froze, listening for footsteps, but all I heard was the hum of the streetlight. The next morning, I saw Graham standing by his mailbox. He looked at me like he'd been waiting. "Appreciate you holding the package," he said. "How did you know it arrived?" I asked. He smiled faintly. I knew it would. He spoke more that week than he ever had, asking about my work at the veterinary clinic, my photography, my routines. He even mentioned Caleb, though I hadn't told him anything about my past. One afternoon he said, "If you ever need someone to walk Maisie to the bus stop, I'm usually outside." I lied and said my schedule didn't allow it. The idea of him walking my daughter anywhere made my stomach twist. But the worst part was the feeling that he wasn't just observing me, he was studying me, learning me. And then my past forced itself back in. One night I got a text from an unknown number. "You think leaving me fixes anything? Caleb." I blocked it instantly, heart racing. I hadn't spoken to him in months. I had changed my number. He had no way of contacting me. 2 days later, when I stepped out for the mail, I saw something leaning against my porch railing. Caleb's guitar, the same one I'd thrown away before moving. But the wood was polished now, the strings new. Someone had taken care of it. I rushed inside, locking the door behind me. 10 minutes later, Graham knocked as if on cue. "I saw a strange man near your yard," he said calmly. "You should be careful." His tone was too steady, too prepared. Like he knew I'd find the guitar. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat on the couch with a kitchen knife beside me, listening for any sound from outside. The neighborhood that once felt peaceful, now felt staged, too still, too perfect, like someone had arranged it with intention. The package on my counter became unbearable. I finally opened it, hands trembling. Inside was a stack of photographs, some from my old apartment, pictures taken through windows. One of me asleep with Maisie curled against me, one of Caleb passed out, then the newer ones, through my Willow Street windows. A photo of me cooking dinner, one of Maisie coloring on the floor, one of me in the bathroom brushing my hair, taken through a gap in the blinds. The room spun. I dropped the box, waking Maisie. I held her tight and whispered that everything was fine, though every instinct screamed that we were in danger. The dragging sound I'd heard at night wasn't furniture. It was a ladder. Someone had been climbing up to my windows. Someone had been watching. I knew then that staying wasn't an option. At 1:40 a.m., I gathered essentials, clothes, documents, a few of Maisie's toys. I didn't turn lights on. I moved through shadows, like someone who already knew she wasn't alone. Maisie stirred when I picked her up. "Are we going on a trip, Mommy?" "Yes," I whispered. "Keep your eyes closed." I carried her to the car quietly, scanning the street. The air felt too still, the porch lights too bright. I double-checked the locks, climbed into the driver's seat, and reached for the ignition. A tap hit my window. I nearly screamed. Graham stood outside, his face half-lit, calm, patient, like he'd simply expected this moment. "Going somewhere, Lena?" he asked softly. "Leaving without saying goodbye?" I didn't answer. I put the car in reverse and backed out so fast I almost hit the mailbox. I drove until Willow Street disappeared behind a line of trees. I stopped at a gas station 20 minutes away. Shaking so hard I had to grip the steering wheel with both hands. I kept expecting Graham's car to pull up beside us, expecting Caleb to appear from behind the pumps. By morning, I had arranged to stay in a coworker's basement unit near Lake Orion. It wasn't much, but it had locks and distance. That was enough. For weeks I kept the blinds closed. Maisie adjusted faster than I did. Kids don't understand fear the same way adults do. They don't imagine shadows climbing ladders or neighbors whispering outside windows. But I understood. I lived with my guard up, aware that peace doesn't last when you've been marked by someone who doesn't let go. I thought I had escaped, until the next package arrived. One morning in early April, I found a small box on my new doorstep. No address, no postal markings, wrapped in brown paper. I already knew who sent it. Inside was a burnt film roll, one I recognized, one I'd left on my Willow Street porch the day Graham told me I had an artistic eye. The edges were charred, but the middle was intact, as if the fire had been stopped on purpose, a message without words. I threw the box away, but the dread stayed. I lay awake for nights, listening to every creak, every footstep from upstairs neighbors, every car passing by. Shadows stretched across the walls like reminders. 2 weeks later, I woke suddenly at 2:14 a.m. The lights in the hallway outside my apartment flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. My blood ran cold. Then came the whisper. Not from outside, not from the vents, from just beyond my bedroom door. "You moved again, Lena. Don't you trust me to watch over you?" I didn't scream. I didn't move. I just lay there, breath caught in my throat, knowing with horrifying clarity that some dangers don't stay in one place. They follow. Listen to your instincts. When something feels off, it usually is. Danger doesn't always arrive loudly. It often slips in quietly, disguised as concern, attention, or coincidence. Protect your boundaries. Protect the people you love. And when the world whispers warnings, believe them before it's too late. I used to think fear was something you grew out of. When I was 9, a drunk man broke into our old apartment by mistake. He left quickly, but the damage stuck with me the way my dad whispered for me to stay quiet. The cops walking through our living room with flashlights. After that, I checked every lock twice, every window latch, every shadow. Fear didn't fade. I just got better at hiding it. Years later, when we moved to a quiet cul-de-sac on Briar Ridge Lane, my parents thought it would help me feel safer. The place felt calm, almost too calm. Fresh lawns, friendly neighbors, dogs barking in distant yards. The only house that felt wrong was the one next door, owned by Mr. Alden, a widower who kept to himself. He barely spoke, hardly turned on lights, and was often seen pacing inside his garage like he was arguing with someone who wasn't there. Something about him made the hairs on my arms stand up. On my 15th birthday, my parents bought me a new Xbox and monitor. They were leaving for a medical conference that weekend, which meant I'd be home alone. I acted excited, but the idea of spending a winter weekend in an empty house didn't exactly thrill me. That night, I gamed with my 2 closest friends, Liam and Carter. We joked around, played late, and I almost forgot about my nerves until I started hearing noises downstairs. At first they were soft thumps, then sharper ones. I muted my mic, stepped into the hallway, and listened. The house felt colder than usual, like it was holding its breath. I crept halfway down the stairs, leaned over the banister, and froze. There were figures moving around below. 4 men, dressed in dark clothing, flashlights covered, searching each room with slow, controlled movements. One carried a bag rattling with metal tools. They moved like they'd done this before. My stomach dropped. I turned to go back upstairs, but a stair creaked under my foot. All 4 men snapped their heads up. I ran. I slammed my bedroom door, locked it, jammed a chair under the knob. My hands shook so badly I almost dropped my headset. "Guys," I whispered into the mic, "call the cops. There are people inside my house." Liam swore. Carter said he was dialing 911. On the other side of my door, someone tried the knob, then pounding. Hard, fast. "Kid," a voice shouted. "Open the door. Right now." I looked around for an escape. There was only one, the bathroom window. Small, but possible. The door cracked behind me as I climbed onto the sink, shoved the window open, and pushed myself out. The ground knocked the breath out of me. Before I could get up, 3 men appeared from the backyard shadows. They had been waiting there. One grabbed my hoodie and slammed me against the fence. Then sirens screamed down the street. The men panicked, cursed, and sprinted toward the woods. Police pulled into our driveway as they disappeared. Officers found one intruder still inside the house. He'd gotten stuck when he went back upstairs. He refused to say what they were after, but the bag he left behind told its own story: duct tape, knives, 2 loaded pistols. This wasn't burglary, this was something worse. My parents flew home immediately. The police questioned me again later that day. One officer hesitated before saying, "They targeted your house specifically. Someone told them you'd be here alone." The only person who knew that besides my parents was Mr. Alden. Detectives searched his house that same night. He was gone. So was his car, his wallet, and most of his belongings. The house was nearly empty except for a mattress and a folder of newspaper clippings about local break-ins and missing teens. Nothing criminal on its own, but nothing normal either. It was as if he'd been waiting for the right moment to disappear. For the next few weeks, we stayed with my grandparents. It took time before I could sleep at all. Even there, every creak made me sit up. When we returned to Briar Ridge Lane to pack our things, the neighborhood felt different. People kept porch lights on later. Parents watched their kids more closely. And Alden's house remained dark. Then one afternoon, biking past his yard, I saw footprints in the snow, fresh ones leading toward the back of the house. I told myself they came from a utility worker, but no tire tracks showed, just footprints. A few nights later, around 2 in the morning, I woke to a faint scrape outside. I went to my window, peeked through the blinds, and for a split second, saw a tall figure standing in Alden's yard, facing our house. I blinked. It was gone. The police checked the property the next day after a neighbor reported noises. They found nothing, but people kept hearing footsteps inside late at night. Long after Alden fled, others swore they saw lights flicker, even though the power had been turned off. Every sound brought back the image of Alden pacing in that garage, muttering to himself. Every shadow looked like someone watching. My parents put the house up for sale. They tried pretending it was just time for a change, but we all knew we couldn't stay. Fear settles into a house the same way dust does in the corners, in the walls, in the spaces you don't look at too long. The night before we moved, I couldn't sleep. I sat on the floor of my half-packed bedroom, listening to the wind. The house next door seemed darker than usual. Around 3 a.m., I heard it, a dull thump, then another, from Alden's house. I went to the window and slowly pulled the blinds apart. The porch was empty, but then I heard footsteps inside. Slow, heavy, moving toward the back door. The door creaked open. A figure stepped out, tall and bundled in a coat. He paused, turned his head, and looked straight toward my window. The angle was impossible. No one should have known where I was or that I was watching, but I felt his eyes meet mine through the glass. I fell back from the window. My heart pounded so hard I felt it in my teeth. When I dared to look again, he was gone. The door was shut, the yard still. We left at sunrise. As we drove away, I craned my neck one last time at the old cul-de-sac. Alden's house sat motionless, dark, and silent. But I didn't feel relieved. Not really, because a house can look empty even when it isn't. A person can disappear without ever really leaving. Now, in our new home, I sleep with lights on less often. I don't check the windows as obsessively, though I still check them. Some habits don't go away, they just soften. But sometimes, late at night, I remember those footsteps downstairs, the whispering, the men watching from the backyard, and Alden's blank stare from the porch months before everything happened. Fear doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just watches and waits, hoping you ignore it long enough to let it in. I try not to ignore it anymore. Pay attention to the instincts that make you uneasy. They're often trying to protect you from something your eyes haven't fully seen yet. Staying aware of your surroundings and the people around you can be the difference between safety and danger. By the time I was 15, I'd already learned that a house could look normal from the outside and still feel like it was collapsing from the inside. My childhood ended in the slow unraveling of my dad, his rants that woke us at 3 in the morning, the plates he smashed when dinner wasn't hot enough, the slurred apologies that never lasted a full day. When he finally walked out, Mom didn't cry until she thought I was asleep. A few months later, desperate for a fresh start, she found a rented farmhouse on 42 Hemlock Road. "It'll be quiet enough to heal," she kept saying, like quiet alone could fix years of fear. The house sat on a stretch of land backed by thick woods. The porch sagged, the paint flaked, but Mom smiled at it like she could already imagine a life without shouting. Across the narrow gravel lane lived our only close neighbor, Alden Burke, 60s. Tall, worn flannel shirts, boots always muddy. People in town called him the guardian of the woods. He showed up our first week with firewood and blueberry jam, speaking gently to my mom like she might break. "The forest is old here," he said. "It listens. It remembers." Mom laughed politely. I didn't. Something about the way he watched us, the way his eyes didn't match his smile, made Piper, our usually friendly dog, tuck her tail and hide behind me. Mom said we were just on edge from the move, but I knew better. Fear doesn't vanish just because the address changes. Life on Hemlock Road should have felt peaceful. School was far enough away that I walked alone most mornings. Mom threw herself into routines, cooking dinner, airing out rooms, taking evening walks through the field. But the quiet didn't calm her the way she hoped. It felt like we were trying to pretend normal instead of living it. Alden visited often, too often, always with a reason. Checking the fence, dropping off kindling, asking about the house. Mom thanked him every time. I stayed a step behind her, watching how he scanned each room like he was memorizing it. One afternoon, I was clipping Piper's leash when Alden wandered over. "You adjusting all right?" he asked. "I guess. You stay out of the deep woods?" "Yeah. Good. Some things don't like strangers." He said it casually, but his eyes lingered on me a little too long, like he was waiting for a reaction. Mom brushed it off when I told her. "He's a lonely old man," she said. "Maybe. But lonely men don't stare at your windows after dusk," and I'd already noticed him standing outside some evenings, watching our house before turning back into the trees. Then, a week later, I woke at 3 a.m., that old, familiar hour from my dad's explosions. Only this time the sound wasn't shouting. It was Piper, growling at the window, her body rigid. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw someone step back into the woods, a tall figure, slow, silent. Mom said the next morning it was probably a deer, but deer don't watch houses. And when Alden showed up that afternoon asking if we slept all right, I realized he somehow already knew we'd been awake. The farmhouse had one part I avoided, the narrow hall closet between the bathroom and kitchen. Cold air always leaked from the crack around the door, and Piper refused to go near it. Mom said it was poor insulation. I said nothing, but I felt something wrong with it, too wrong for old wood and bad vents. Small things kept stacking up, the gate latching itself open overnight, footprints behind the house that matched no boots we owned, Piper's sudden barking at empty hallways. One night I found the closet door open when I went to brush my teeth. I froze. No one used that closet. I hadn't touched it all day. Piper whimpered and backed down the hall with her tail dragging the floor. Mom said she must have left it open by accident, but even she didn't sound convinced. The next day, Alden came by again. His eyes went straight to the closet behind me. "You keeping that door shut?" he asked. "Yeah. Good. Some things shouldn't be given space." I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to know. That night, I put a chair under the back door handle. I lay awake, listening to the house breathe until Piper nudged me with her nose, trembling. Then I heard it, scratching, from inside the hallway, slow, dragging, deliberate. I held Piper close, barely breathing. I couldn't bring myself to check. The sound lasted minutes, then stopped abruptly. Like whoever, or whatever was behind that door decided it wasn't worth trying. In the morning, the chair I jammed under the back door was shifted, just enough to show someone had tested it. Mom insisted we were imagining things, but her hands were shaking when she said it. Something had been in our hallway, and someone knew we were scared. Mom finally called the landlord. He walked through the house with an expression that told me none of this was surprising to him. "It's an old place," he said. "Animals in the walls, doors swell, wind rattles things." Alden appeared before he even finished. I didn't hear a car, I didn't hear footsteps. He just seemed to materialize by the porch, asking what was wrong. The landlord explained. Alden's eyes drifted to the back door, then to the closet, then to us. "You'll get used to the noises," he said. "People always do." His tone didn't comfort me. It sounded like a warning disguised as reassurance. That night, I woke again, another quiet, heavy hour past midnight. This time, the sound wasn't scratching. It was my bedroom door. The knob turned once, stopped, then a voice through the wood, low enough to make my skin crawl. "You awake?" I couldn't move. Piper pressed against me, shaking violently. The knob jiggled again. Not forceful testing. Mom's text came seconds later. "Stay in your room. Call the police." I did. Officers came 20 minutes later, checked everything, found nothing. No broken locks, no footprints, no sign of forced entry. but someone whispered through my door, and I only knew one man who always seemed nearby, no matter the hour. The next morning, Alden knocked. Mom answered, pale and exhausted. "You all right?" he asked. I saw the police lights. Mom stiffened. "How did you see them?" He nodded toward the woods. Light travels, but the police had been behind the house. Not the road, not the driveway. Behind. He stepped back as if he'd said nothing unusual. "You two should be careful. Some places don't take kindly to being abandoned." "We're not leaving," Mom said too quickly. He gave a small smile. "You will." And then he walked away, leaving mud tracks across our porch boards. Mom didn't argue when I said we needed to go. We packed that night. We planned to leave before dawn, hoping Alden wouldn't notice. Piper paced nervously as we boxed essentials. Mom barely spoke. Every creak made both of us flinch. Around midnight, I heard footsteps in the hallway again. Slow, heavy, purposeful. I gripped Piper's collar as Mom whispered, "Stay quiet." The steps stopped outside my room. The doorknob turned, not tentatively this time like someone ready to walk right in. Then Alden's voice, calm, almost gentle. "You shouldn't run. It's worse when people run." Mom squeezed my arm so hard it hurt. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the pressure on the knob released. Footsteps retreated. The front door creaked open, then softly shut. We didn't wait. Mom grabbed the keys. I grabbed Piper. We ran out the back and around to the car, not turning on a single light. The gravel crunched loud under our tires as we pulled away. Halfway down the lane, the headlights swept across the edge of the woods, and there he was. Alden, standing motionless between the trees, watching us. He didn't move, didn't shout, didn't chase. He only followed our car with his eyes until we turned out of sight. We drove straight to my aunt's house 2 towns over. Mom cried the entire way. I didn't. I kept replaying his voice through my door, the certainty in it. We never returned to the farmhouse. The landlord didn't ask questions. Mom got a restraining order. Nothing came of it, nothing visible. Anyway, sometimes I wonder if Alden ever cared about being caught at all, or if he only cared about us leaving, just like he said we would. Years later, every time I hear a house settle at night, my chest tightens. Some fears stay with you, even after you outrun them. Hemlock Road is one of mine. When something feels wrong, trust it. Silence is not safety, and kindness is not always harmless. You're allowed to leave any place or any person that threatens your peace, even if no one else believes you. I never planned on coming back to Birch Lane. Growing up, I used to visit my Aunt Marlene here during long summer weeks, when my parents, already halfway through the unraveling that would eventually become their divorce, needed time apart. I loved those summers, or at least that's what I always told myself. Long afternoons in her cluttered backyard, cicadas rattling the trees, the smell of gasoline from the cracked shed door, and the hum of neighborhood sprinklers were the backdrop of my only peaceful childhood memories. Or so I thought. After the divorce, after I spiraled into a decade of mistakes and empty bottles and debts I still don't want to think about, coming back to Birch Lane felt like retreating to a place where I'd once been safe, except the truth was less noble. I was running. The house was mine now only because my aunt died suddenly of a stroke, alone in her kitchen, the TV still playing one of those afternoon courtroom shows she loved. I inherited the house, her dusty furniture, her shoebox full of expired coupons, and more problems than I'd admit publicly. I told my friends what few I had left that the move was a reset, my clean slate. But detoxing from my old life was like trying to outrun a shadow. The drinking, the private loans, the sense that every phone call was either a bill or a threat. I carried all of that up the porch steps like luggage. The first night in the house, I dropped onto the couch with a takeout burger and noticed the place across the cul-de-sac. It was quiet, completely dark except for a soft line of light leaking from an upstairs window. Curtains always drawn. A cracked open window at the top like a mouth barely exhaling. Something about it made my chest tighten. I told myself it was nothing. Then I found the first note from my aunt. Her handwriting, shaky but certain. Mara. Avoid if possible. No last name. No explanation. Just that. I should have been unsettled. Instead, I laughed, assuming it was another one of her cryptic grudges. But already, something in the house felt slightly off, like it had inherited her unease. The silence of the place didn't help. Birch Lane was too still at night. No teenagers speeding down the street, no dogs barking, no kids squealing in yards. just wind brushing dead leaves and the occasional soft thump of old wooden walls settling. My motion cameras, the cheap ones I'd placed at the driveway for peace of mind, clicked on around 2:14 a.m. the first night. I checked the feed on my phone half asleep, expecting a raccoon or the neighbor's cat. Instead, I saw a blurred silhouette. A woman. Standing at the edge of my driveway, completely motionless, facing my house. She didn't step forward, didn't turn, didn't move at all. I locked my phone and blamed the whiskey I'd sworn was only for the first night to wind down. But the next night at exactly 2:14 a.m., the camera triggered again. Same figure, same position, a woman's outline, shoulders slumped, head slightly tilted, like she was listening. That was when I stopped laughing at my aunt's note. By the end of the first week, I was barely sleeping, working freelance graphic design from my aunt's dusty dining room, surrounded by boxes of her old paperwork. Felt like living inside a shed built out of someone else's memories. The house creaked constantly, pipes groaned, and every night, always at the same time, the woman appeared in the camera footage, never coming closer, never leaving traces, just watching. I asked a neighbor about her while raking leaves. A white-haired man named Gerald stiffened at the mention of the house across the way. "Best not ask about that girl," he muttered, pushing his hat lower. "Terrible business years back." "What business? Who is she?" He shook his head. "Keep your curtains closed at night, that's my advice." Then he shuffled back to his porch, ending the conversation like it was a door he'd slammed. People on the street acted the same way. Standoffish, nervous, as if talking about the Ellington house. The silent one across from mine broke something fragile in the air. I tried to shrug it off and focus on the house repairs, but the attic had its own plans. The ladder up there groaned when I pulled it down, that old metallic shriek that echoes in your teeth. The attic smelled like insulation and dead summers. Among the boxes of holiday decorations and ancient linens, I found a dusty crate, labeled in my aunt's handwriting, "Summer '95, do not watch." Curiosity beat common sense. Inside the box, wrapped in brittle newspaper, lay an 8mm film reel and a stack of photographs that punched me with a jolt of recognition and confusion. There I was at age 7, holding a slingshot and grinning with a chipped front tooth. Next to me stood a girl, barefoot, dark hair, eyes slightly too intense for a child's. I stared at the photos so long my fingers felt numb. Why didn't I remember her? On the back of each photo was a name scrawled in blue ink: Evan and Mara. Birch Lane, summer friends. I dropped the pictures. For a moment, the attic swayed beneath me. Mara, the name from my aunt's warning. The name that felt familiar in the way nightmares sometimes feel familiar, like something you forgot on purpose. I tried asking around again, but people recoiled like I'd mentioned a plague. A younger woman from 2 houses down actually shut her front door in my face with a strained apology. And that night, I heard humming outside, a soft tune, childlike. The kind of melody you hum when you're skipping down a sidewalk on a warm July day. Except it was November. And the melody, I knew it. My chest tightened as I stepped onto the porch. There were muddy footprints in the shape of bare feet, and small pebbles arranged in a pattern I recognized from childhood games. A circle, then a line, then a circle, but I couldn't remember who taught me that pattern. My therapist friend Nicole later suggested dissociative memory loss, childhood trauma suppressing itself, but the humming kept me awake for hours. Eventually, curiosity beat fear, or maybe loneliness just made fear feel like company. Either way, I decided to watch the 8mm film. I borrowed an old projector, threaded the reel, and dimmed the lights. The film flickered through dust motes like ghosts waking from nap. It showed me tiny, skinny, bad haircut and a girl, Mara. We played by the hedge in my aunt's yard, the two of us chasing lightning bugs, drawing circles in the dirt, running toward the very house across the cul-de-sac. Everything made sense until the final frames. The camera jolted suddenly, the image blurred. Then it focused on the upstairs window of the Ellington house, on Mara, standing inside the room, calling my name, Evan. Her mouth formed it clearly. She pressed her palm to the glass. Then the film shook violently, the sound distorting. The final whisper was rotten with static, but unmistakable. "Don't leave me again, Ev." The projector whirred to an end. I sat there shaking, heart banging against my ribs like it wanted out. Questions stacked inside me like bodies. Why was she in that house? Why couldn't I remember? Why did the neighbors react like mentioning her scraped open an old wound? I had to know the truth. The Ellington house wasn't locked. The door opened with a gentle push, as though expecting me. Dust coated everything except for a single trail up the staircase like someone walked that path every day. At the top, I found a bedroom with an old woman sitting crooked in a chair, her gray hair hanging like curtains. She didn't turn her head when she spoke. Her voice scraped softly. "She waits for you every night." My throat tightened. "Where is Mara?" No response. Just breathing. I stepped around, watching her eyes stare blankly ahead, and asked louder, "Where is she? What happened to her?" Finally, she whispered, "Mara died in 1995. You were the last one to see her. You told her to wait for you by the window, and she never left." I staggered back, my stomach heaved, breath burning. I ran down the stairs and stumbled outside into cold air, but when I looked up, the cracked window was open. A young woman stood there, long, dark hair, bare feet, the same face from the film reel, smiling. My phone buzzed, camera triggered, 2:14 a.m. The image displayed her silhouette standing at my driveway, and when I turned, raising my phone with trembling hands toward my own house window, her reflection stood behind me. "You came back. Unresolved trauma doesn't disappear just because you leave it behind. All the things we don't confront, our pasts, our mistakes, our buried memories wait patiently for us, often in the darkest corners of our lives. Facing the truth may scare you, but running from it will haunt you." I spent most of my 20s drifting between cheap apartments, thin walls, noisy neighbors, and leases that felt like countdowns. Buying a house always seemed like something other people did, but when I turned 32, after years of working 2 part-time jobs and saving every dollar I could, I finally stepped into a place that was mine, a pale green 1,960 seconds, fixer-upper at 3842 Elm Street. The house leaned a little, the porch slanted, and the floors creaked like they'd been complaining for decades. Still, I felt proud standing on that lawn. The mortgage terrified me, but I told myself I could handle it. The previous owner, an older man who barely made eye contact, gave me one warning before he left. "Strange noises behind the house at night," he muttered. "Best not to look." I chalked it up to small-town superstition or maybe just a cranky man trying to sound mysterious. My closest neighbor, Mrs. Corbett, lived alone in the house next door. She introduced herself the day I moved in. She kept her silver hair pulled so tight it almost looked painful. Something about her sharp, assessing stare made me uncomfortable. She watched my moving boxes, the truck, even the spare key I put in a bowl on the porch. "Elm Street isn't as peaceful as it looks," she said. I laughed politely, trying not to dwell on the way her eyes tracked every movement of my hands. She reminded me of someone who knew more than she ever explained. For the first week, I focused on painting walls and fixing cabinet doors. I didn't think about the creaks in the hallway or the faint scraping sounds outside after midnight. Old houses made noise, I told myself, nothing more. Then my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen since high school: Ryan Keller. We'd been friends once, the kind that bonded over dumb jokes and late-night drives. I remembered the fun, not the messes he caused. So when he texted that he was in town and wanted to stop by, I said yes. He arrived that same evening with cheap beer and a grin that hadn't changed. For a moment, it felt good to slip back into familiar conversation, but I could feel Mrs. Corbett watching us from her window. That night, Ryan stayed on my couch, claiming he'd missed the last bus. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to the sound of him walking around the house. Cabinet doors opened and closed. Soft whispering. I almost got up to check, but exhaustion convinced me it wasn't worth the trouble. By morning, he was gone, leaving a quick thank you note. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the ceramic bowl on the porch was empty. My spare key was missing. I spent the next few days telling myself the key would turn up. Maybe I moved it while unpacking. Maybe it fell behind the porch boards. I didn't want to think of Ryan taking it. I didn't want to admit I barely knew who he was anymore. 3 days later, I came home from work and saw the front door slightly ajar. At first, I thought I'd forgotten to lock it. But when I stepped inside, cold panic hit me so hard I stopped breathing. Mud tracked across the carpet, drawers were pulled out, cabinets left wide open. My TV and laptop were gone. The metal lockbox that held my passport, emergency cash, and my dad's watch gone too. Before I could process anything, Mrs. Corbett hurried over. "I saw a tall man in a dark jacket go in earlier," she said. "I warned you someone was watching." Her words felt less like concern and more like an accusation. I tried calling Ryan just to check, I told myself. No answer. Then I called again. Blocked. That was the moment I knew something was seriously wrong. The next day, a mutual friend told me Ryan had been bouncing around the area, stealing from people he knew, sometimes involved with shady dealers. It sounded nothing like the friend I remembered, but everything like the man who wandered my house at 3 a.m. When police called 2 days later, they confirmed it. Ryan had been stopped during a late-night traffic check almost 90 miles away. In his trunk were my belongings and items stolen from 2 other burglaries. They also found a spare house key in his jacket pocket. In the report, officers said the key was scratched and dirty, like it had been dragged through grit or wedged somewhere. I felt violated, angry, embarrassed. I changed my locks, installed a cheap camera, and stopped talking about it. People at work asked why I looked tired. I just shrugged. I didn't want to explain that I jumped every time my doorbell rang. The house creaked differently after the break-in. Or maybe I just listened differently. I thought the worst was behind me. I was wrong. Months later, when early spring softened the air, I tried to return to normal. I fixed small things around the house, went back to steady routines, and forced myself to ignore the late-night shifting sounds behind the fence. One weekend, I was repairing the sagging porch step, something I'd been putting off since moving in. When I pried the board up, a small metal clink made me freeze. Under the porch, wedged deep in dust and splinters, was the original spare key. Untouched, dirty. Clearly there long before Ryan ever visited. A cold, hollow realization spread through my chest. Ryan didn't take the spare key from the porch. Someone else had removed it early on, copied it, and slipped it back under the porch when I wasn't looking. Someone with easy access. Someone who'd been watching my house closely enough to know exactly when to act. When I looked up, Mrs. Corbett was standing at her window, but her attention wasn't on me. She was staring at the new lock I'd installed after the burglary, not curious, studying it, measuring it. For the first time, I questioned the story she told about a tall man in a dark jacket. She could have made it up. She could have been describing anyone or no one at all. The stolen items found with Ryan didn't prove he entered my house using a key. He could have broken in. Or maybe he didn't break in at all, maybe the door was already unlocked. I thought about all the times I caught her staring. The way she'd warned me on day 1. Her comment about Elm Street not being peaceful. The way she always seemed to know when I was home. The key in my hand felt heavier than metal. Someone else had access to my house, someone who lived right across the fence. I didn't confront her at first. I wanted to believe I was wrong, misinterpreting things, paranoid from the break-in. Fear makes you doubt your own instincts, but I couldn't ignore the growing unease. Every night I heard soft footsteps behind my house. My back gate latch would sometimes be lifted in the morning even though I always locked it. My mailbox lid started showing up open. One afternoon, I came home early and found Mrs. Corbett standing on my porch, not knocking, just looking at the door. "Need something?" I asked. She didn't blink. "These new locks of yours look strange on this house." "I just want to feel safe," I said. "Locks don't matter if someone already knows how to get in." She said it casually, like she was commenting on the weather. Then she turned and walked back to her yard. That night, I pushed a chair under the back door handle and kept every light on. Around 2 a.m, I heard movement outside, slow, deliberate steps in the gravel behind the house. I looked out through a corner of the blinds and saw a figure standing by the fence. Thin, upright, still, watching my house. I ducked away, heart pounding, and called the police. They checked, found nothing, and left with sympathetic looks. But I knew what I saw, and I knew who lived on the other side of that fence. By the next morning, I decided I needed better security. I installed brighter motion lights and re-angled the porch camera. When I finished, I looked across the yard and saw her standing outside again, her gaze fixed on me. "You can't change the nature of a street," she said quietly. "People here learn everything about each other." I didn't answer. I locked my door behind me twice. I tried to shake it off, tried to act like a normal homeowner again. But every time I walked outside, I felt eyes on my back. The camera caught shadows near the fence at odd hours. My mail arrived crumpled, like someone had rifled through it before I got there. One night, my phone chimed with a motion alert from the porch. I opened the feed, expecting a raccoon or a delivery driver. Instead, I saw her. Mrs. Corbett stood just outside the camera's reach, inches from my front door. She stayed there for nearly a full minute, unmoving, staring straight at the lock. When the light finally flipped on, she walked away without panic, as if it were routine. In the morning, she was sweeping leaves that didn't exist, acting like nothing happened. That was it. That was the push I needed. I called a realtor, listed the house, and started packing. I didn't care about the money I would lose. Peace of mind was worth more than any mortgage. On my last day, as I loaded the final box into my car, Mrs. Corbett walked to the edge of her lawn. "It's a shame you didn't stay," she said. "Some houses choose their people." I shut the car door. "I never belonged here." "No," she said, almost satisfied. "You didn't." I drove away with her reflection shrinking in the mirror. For miles, I swear, I could still feel her watching. I never found out who copied my key. I never figured out who walked through my house that first night. And I never returned to Elm Street. Some places aren't meant to be understood. Some neighbors aren't meant to be trusted. And some houses never really become yours.